Hi everyone, I'm Apsara DeQuinzio, Senior Curator for Modern and Contemporary Art and Phyllis C. Wattis Matrix Curator at the UC Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. Since the very beginning, the Matrix exhibition series has been anchored by the following three characteristics: flexibility, spontaneity, and experimentation. Orbits of Known and Unknown Objects, SFAI Histories, Matrix 277, continues the spirit of experimentation outside the museum galleries, bringing together a network of individuals to produce an exhibition in the form of a website. It is the first of its kind within the program's history. At its core, the project is a response to the unprecedented moment in which we currently live, the contours of which are shaped by the coronavirus pandemic that has caused museums around the world to shutter their doors and pivot to online programming. The pandemic has had an untold impact on industries, institutions, businesses, schools, and organizations of all shapes and sizes in this country and beyond, which have had to find new ways to operate during this period of physical distancing and financial duress. One institution in particular that was acutely impacted by the pandemic is the legendary Bay Area art school, the San Francisco Art Institute, which came under threat of having to permanently close its doors on the cusp of its 150th anniversary. The school is now in the process of re-envisioning its future in the face of the very complicated situation we continue to navigate. Matrix 277 explores and honors the rich history of SFAI while looking forward to its future. Furthermore, the project is a testament to how institutions can come together during moments of crisis and through collaboration find renewed inspiration and support. The genesis of the project lies in a book that was initiated to commemorate the 150th anniversary, organized by Becky Alexander and Jeff Gunderson of the Anne Bremer Memorial Library at SFAI, as well as Nina Zurier, an artist, SFAI alumna, and former BAMPFA employee. Working in close collaboration with the design firm McFadden and Thorpe, we developed the inventive, playful concept for Matrix 277. The website centers on a diverse array of about 75 primary objects that engage with or reflect on SFAI's history. Using objects that relate to the institution as points of departure, the platform shines a light on the salient orbits of these objects, which encompass other artworks, people, videos, and places over the trajectory of the school's history. The objects have been selected by Alexander, Gunderson, and Zurier, as well as Janine Lentine, April Martin, Rai Purvis, Sherwin Rio, and Christopher Adam Williams, who have then populated the entry with supporting images, links, and videos that relate to each topic. We have made this video featuring all the project's collaborators as the public program for the project. I hope you will check out the exhibition by visiting matrix277.org. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Frost and I'm a curatorial assistant at BAM PFA, and I'm here to give you a quick tour of how to get lost in the Orbits of Known and Unknown Objects exhibition website. So when you arrive at matrix277.org, you'll be greeted by one of the exhibition walls. These are groups of entries organized by theme, which you can see down at the bottom here, and can be rotated through based on this button in the lower left. Each of these items can be clicked on, which links you to an entry related to the object and SFAI history. No matter where you are on the website, you can always get back to the homepage with the Orbits button in the upper left. Of course, there are other ways to navigate the website, including the index here in the upper right, which allows you to see every single entry on the website, or to navigate by tag, which are different thematic groupings, or to sort by decade so that you can see things chronologically. In each of these entries, much of the information is formatted differently or takes different shapes. This entry, for example, is mainly a video with an illustrated interview. Each page has also its decade tags listed, as well as its thematic tags, and you can click through these to see the other items in that grouping. A different type of entry is this one on Studios 9 and 10, which is more of a long form essay in which there are images embedded, links within the text, and at the very end, it follows the format of every other entry in that it has secondary connections which connect this entry to other items like it or within the same plot on the website. Yet another form of the entry includes a slideshow. This one, in addition to having many images, also includes caption information, which tells a narrative of the entry. And finally, if you want to know who created the website and why, you can read about it here in the About section, where we have both the long essay as well as bios for all of the contributors. So that's it, and I wish you the best of luck in getting lost in these known and unknown histories.
I'm Jeff Gunderson, the longtime librarian here at the San Francisco Art Institute's Anne Bremer Memorial Library. This library is great to be in to show people things because it's rich. You know, it's the oldest art library in the West Coast. You know, books that really were, pieced together by studio artists, because it really is a library for studio artists as much as anything. And then it sort of segued into, paralleling the curriculum that was always taught here too. Checked out the most books on Hank Wessel, the photographer Hank Wessel, who taught here for a number of years, who is a pretty darn interesting photographer. Here it is with the orange book tape on it. It's the first edition of Cartier-Bresson's Decisive Moment, taped over the Matisse, parts of the Matisse cover to the thing. And then I finally became real proud of it because I realized that copy of the Decisive Moment has probably been looked at by more fascinating photographers than any other copy of that book, because it's been here since it was published in 1952 or 53. And so all those photographers who've been through here, whether it's Larry Sultan or Catherine Opie or anybody else, probably looked at that copy of it. Their fingerprints are all over that thing, and so it's a very cool copy that way.
Well, April, it's really a pleasure to interview you. I think a lot of how I focused on this project was thinking about location and thinking about the sort of gravity that a location might have. And I'm really interested by what you've written about. You wrote about the library and about the tower. Can you talk a little bit about how you came across choosing these two specific sites for your research?
I spent a lot of time in the library just because it was right next to the digital photography lab, which is where I spent probably 95% of my time. And when I wasn't in the lab, I was actually in the library. And over the 2 years that I was at SFAI, I developed a friendship, I would say, with Jeff Gunderson, head librarian, and Becky. And so it was like a second home to me. And in thinking about this project of honoring the history of SFAI, I thought about one of the most important locations in on campus, and that is the library, and thinking about all of the people that had passed through there and had thumbed through the books and checked out books. Thinking about Cartier-Bresson's The Decisive Moment. There's an important section about that book, and that book has been in the library since, I guess, the 40s or 50s. And so also thinking about just the beauty of that place. You know, you walk in and it's those beautiful murals that you get a chance to see, and you have the views of the city, Coit Tower, overlooking the courtyard of SFAI. And so it's such an important location to the history of the school, and an important location in terms of its beauty and its history in the art world. And so I chose the library because it's meant so much to me and so many other artists that have passed through there who were studying at SFI, and people who've come to do research about the many artists that have taught and studied at the school.
And did you have any particular personal story that resonates with you in those certain locations during your time there as an SFAI student?
I think one of the most important memories I will have is coming to the library most recently, now that we are in a pandemic and we can't go to our beloved and cherished places because they've been shut down because of COVID. And it was also really hard to think that there are people that won't get a chance to share in the love of that space anytime soon, and that other people in the next generation have an opportunity to share in the love of SFAI's Ann Brimmer Library, and also get a chance to meet Jeff and Becky, who are amazing librarians and amazing human beings, and who have a place in my heart. Hi, Becky.
Wow.
Tell me about your zine on the tower and about the ghost stories, the ghosts that occupy SFAI.
Yeah. So I've been working at SFAI since 2005 as a staff member in the library. And over those years, I've heard a lot about the ghost and spent a lot of time in the tower. The library uses it as storage. And so I've, brought books up, brought stuff down, a lot of just trips up and down those stairs. And part of what you were saying, April, about that sense of physical place is something I have thought a lot about too in relation to this project. You can see like the traces in so many places in the school of what it used to be and things that have happened in those places. And that's definitely true in the tower too. And so I had a lot of questions about that. And part of what I did for this project was try to answer some of those questions, like, why was the tower built in the first place? It's such a strange space. It's really dark and dusty and cold. what were they thinking of using that for? Was it just for decorative purposes, or did they really have a purpose to make that tower a usable space? And then where did all these stories about ghosts come from? You know, the building is old, but at some point, it's too new to be a place that's haunted. It's like ghosts don't really set up shop until a building's been around for a while. So where did those stories come from? And so my piece on the ghost and on the tower tried to look into some of those questions, and it was really fun to do. We looked at old blueprints that you can see sort of the original plans for the three tower rooms, and there's still remnants of the room that was outfitted as a residence and used for maintenance staff back in the day. And it turns out that some of those maintenance staff who live there were the people who first started to, well, maybe not first, it's hard to say, but who really were proponents of the ghost stories, who, you know, as you can imagine, like sleeping in those weird rooms, it makes a lot of sense that they would be interested in the ghost and sort of pushing for the ghost. So it was a lot of fun to look into that stuff and see how that space changed over time and how the stories about the space changed over time. And you know, the things that happened, at one time a window got left open in the tower, pigeons got in and set up shop and took over one of the tower rooms. They were there for a while, so long that they decided they needed to close off that space and declare it a biohazard. So that room was closed for like 10 years, opened up again, cleaned out, turned into a camera obscura. Like it's just like a little microcosm of the school in a way, to see what one odd space has become and how it's become kind of like a school legend at the same time.
Have you had any ghost sightings or experiences?
I personally don't believe in ghosts. So I think that colors my perception. I think maybe if I did, I would have. I've definitely been up there at night, and there are not very many light switches in the tower. So if you go up there in the night, you actually are really in the dark a lot of the time. It's very creepy. But I wouldn't say that I've had any ghost experiences myself.
Okay. Yes. I ain't afraid of no ghosts. No, that was great. You guys are like killing
Good, guys.
Hey, Nina.
Hey, Becky.
So you are an SFAI alum. You've been a staff member, and you know as much as almost anybody about the history of the school, I would say at this point.
I don't think so.
Well, you know a lot. And so my question is, what did you learn over the course of your investigations for this project that was new or surprising for you?
Oh, well, that's like, you know, I could be here for a couple of hours, but what was most interesting to me was to find out stuff about basically when I was there. I was a student from 71 to 74, and so there's like things like this photo by Ingeborg Gerdes from 1969. It's outside Studio 16, the photography studio. She sent it to me. I posted it on the alumni Facebook page and asked people if they could identify any of the people in the photo. And Rita Keegan, whose brother, Lauren Morrison, is in the photo on the left side, wrote a post that said, and so I quote, so I'm going to be reading this. We had a small, informal third world students group that marched, more like walked, into Fred Martin's office and demanded they set up a scholarship program, to which Fred, in his very laid back way, said, sure. I think that was in the spring of 1969. So it started the next fall. So, and then another thing was Mary Lovelace O'Neill, who's shown here with some students in 1972. She was my painting teacher. And this photo is from the same time. And she always sat on the models chair in class. We never had models. And she would just talk and talk. She was so great, just amazing painting teacher, just a teacher and a real strong role model for me and I think many other of her students. But I didn't know that she was also teaching a class in the New World Studies department called Problems in the City. And this is one of the entries that I did. And so the course description read, and I quote, just what it says, a look at minority and subcultures, including the different ghettos, farm communities, political groups, the government, the sexual underground, dope, gambling, rich people, etc. So, I mean, what a cool class. I also did not know that she was very active in the civil rights movement, or that she and her boyfriend, Stokely Carmichael, my God, were very active in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee when they were at Howard University, or that Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin were her mentors when she was a teenager. In 1979, she and I both were at Berkeley. She was teaching in the art department, and I was at the art museum. And in 1985, she was the first African-American, and this I just discovered, this is like a brand new discovery. She was the first African-American awarded tenure at Berkeley. In 1985, the first African-American, can you believe it? I mean, she deserved it, of course, but I mean, to be the first in 1985, I mean, come on. And then she became the chair of the art department. And now she's getting a lot of attention for her work. And the last time that I was at SF MoMA, there was just like a killer painting of hers, and one of the big black ones from 1977. And it's on view in the MoMA collection gallery. So anyway, my teacher, and I found out a whole bunch of stuff about her that I didn't know. Okay, so Chris, first, I just want to say thank you for all the awesome expertise and, coordination in making this video and getting us all together. It's just, thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So, and you've had experience. And so that's like my question here. So you've done 2 great interviews, one with Mike Henderson and one with Dewey Crumpler. Both of them are painters like yourself. How did you get started on doing these interviews? And then why did you decide to do an animation for the Orbit project of the Dewey interview?
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Well, I know Brianna Heineman, when she was at the school, she was looking for someone to interview Mike Henderson, and pretty much no one stepped up. And so Gordon came to me casually when I was walking down the hall and said, "Hey, would you like to do an interview with Mike Henderson?" And I didn't know who he was. I'll be honest with you. I didn't know who he was. And so I was like, oh, okay, yeah. And it was me and Michael Mwaku who I picked him up in Berkeley. We went to his house and we were in his shed and we just started talking. And I just really enjoyed learning about the history of SFA from, another person of color's perspective, specifically a Black man's perspective. And so I was like, wow, this is great. And it just so happened that I was asked again, because everyone loved the interview, to interview Dewey. And, I never thought of like interviewing Dewey. I didn't know what questions to ask. And so like when I was talking to Jeff and going through, his archives, I ran across this flyer that was really big. So I unfolded it, and it had the Arts American Culture Society, and it had all these names. and some of them went to SFAI, and I was like, huh. So I'm going to ask them about the show. And the reason why I wanted to do the actual animation instead of just, you know, doing a Zoom conversation is because, you know, Dewey's voice is very powerful, and he has a lot of inflections, and he pauses and he really thinks about what he wants to say. And so I wanted to give the viewer just a visual representation of his voice, and also his cadence, which I got his cadence down, where it's 5 seconds, 6 seconds, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, depending. And then when he gets excited, then it's pretty quick. It picks up the pace. But when he's talking, it's just 5 second conversation here, stop, you know, dun, 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 stop. And so if I wanted to mimic Dewey's voice, I got him down now. I'll do it one day. Just got to get really deep. And so, but it was just fun conversation, and I love the guy. I only took one class, but every time I seen him, we always have something cool to say to each other. And one thing he always does is, "All right, now you got it," and then he points at me and walks away. So all right, I guess I got it. And that's it.
That's great. That's great.
Well, Professor Janine, you're actually one of my actual first professors at SFAI, because I had your class in the morning, and it was the English class, and it was fun. And the one thing that really drawn me to you was you just have a lovely personality, and you really care about life. And speaking of life, like, what was your first moments when you saw the meadow at its beginnings, and how it's blossomed now?
Yeah, I so remember, you being in that class, and just two incredible painters, and that I'm glad you actually asked about the beginning. For me, what is the beginning, which is very late in the life of the meadow, but for me, I actually taught at SFAI a full year before I actually stepped into the meadow as someone who was going to interact with it. I kept hearing about the meadow. But one day in August of what was to be my second year, I was just at school before school started, and I woke up that day and I was just like, I need to go check out this space that people are calling the meadow. And I just went to school. I just got on the F train and came to school. It was empty, and I just walked through, and it was very bare. And I have lots of pictures of those first couple visits. And I just could really feel the energy there. And when Jeff and Becky gave me those early pictures, part of what's been so wonderful about doing this project is that the sense that I felt when I went there that day has already been alive in the meadow. It was not particularly manifest on that day, but when I see those early pictures of the Terrace Cafe and people just kind of hanging out in the meadow, and just all these classes that have been there over the years, I feel like the meadow has, at least in the recent history, that it was kind of fallow in a sense. It was just there wasn't a huge amount of daily interaction. But then after that moment, when I just went out there, and Charles Desmarais was the president then, and I wrote to him and I just said, are you open to me doing some work in the meadow? And I kind of proposed some basic ways that I would set that in motion, and he was really open to it. And in fact, some students had already been working on it. As an artist and a writer and teacher, the way of being that feels most compelling to me is that what I do is I just nudge something. I just have to touch something in the slightest way, and all these things become activated. And it's not people are oh my God, you've done so much work out there. And yes, I have literally spent thousands of hours out there moving mulch and digging and things that look like work. For me, I could do it all day long and just be like the happiest person alive, but like helping to cultivate an environment where people can come into it and feel like there's something they want to do there, or they can see a possibility that they might not have seen. And I think the most compelling places in that is not so much like, oh, I can go grow carrots. It's more like, oh, I'm someone who thinks of myself as anxious, and yet when I'm doing these activities, I encounter myself differently. And I've had so many students tell me that, and somehow, literally by sweeping the redwood bench, they kind of regain a sense of connection to this thing that matters to them. And that to me is the most important aspect of what I think the meadow, kind of the importance of what the meadow is in relation to the rest of SFAI, that it's a kind of space that welcomes every discipline, there's something that anyone could do out there. And it's a place where that could be your whole work, but I also think it's a place where, whether you're a writer, sculptor, painter, photographer, filmmaker, performance-based person, whatever your medium, whatever your form, there's a way that the place can support and nourish that and like activate something.
That's really awesome, and I could tell you, I really enjoyed seeing it over the years flourish and then become what it is now. And it's beautiful, and it really touched a lot of the students' hearts, and it was a place to unwind and relax. So thank you.
So it's really great to be able to have a chance to have some further conversations. And one of the great benefits of working on this project was to actually meet some people I hadn't really interacted with before. And Rai, I've really appreciated talking with you during our meetings, and then just reading your piece, which is, it's just such a beautiful piece of writing, and there's just so much thought in it. And I just wonder if you could talk about your own being at SFAI through the TC Cannon Scholarship. And yeah, just maybe I'd love to hear anything you'd like to say about, your connection with, for example, Linda Lomohaftawa, or any of the other painters or artists you talk about, just maybe kind of speaking through the lens of your own work.
Also, I want to preface that my dog is snoring behind me, so if there's a weird noise that comes through. But yeah, I went to SFAI from 2007 to 2011. And I'm originally from New Mexico. It was kind of just by chance that I even heard of SFAI, but was able to go there due to the TC Cannon Scholarship and some Navajo Nation scholarships, which is my tribe. For me, like in the middle of the desert, I just never even heard of his name. So it just started from there, is just even hearing a name and researching. I didn't find a lot, unfortunately, of coverage of Indigenous and Native American artists in class and curriculum until I took a course with Professor Ella Diaz, who is now working at Cornell and is amazing and is a mentor to me. And also Carlos Villa, who has been a huge mentor to me during that time. They would kind of just show work or reference artists to check out. With Ella Diaz, I got introduced to James Luna's work, which is just opened this whole door of possibility. And, I think back to me being, 18, 19 and 2007, 2008, and taking my, like, anytime I'd visit New Mexico, I wanted to be also a James Luna myself. And so I'd have my mom like take awkward pictures of me performing some weird ritual, and like what was I thinking? But I got direct inspiration from just learning these prolific Indigenous and Native artists that it was just a privilege. How we had to submit a picture or something, an object that represent us, all of us here, for the bios in this show. Mine is a picture of this building out on the res towards Arizona, that says Yatahe. And when my mom was alive, I lost my mom earlier this year, but when she was alive, you know, she's this little, you know, frail thing, and I'm driving her to my uncle's house. This doesn't even have anything to do with anything, but I stop the car and I'm like, Mom, I got to take a picture of this building real quick. She's like, what? This doesn't, you know, but yet she understood that, you know, this is the crazy artist just has to take pictures of random buildings, you know. But if it weren't for artists like TC Cannon and that just opened the realm of possibility, which I think is why it's so important to talk about these artists and provide a space to recognize Indigenous and Native artists, contemporary artists in curriculum, in pedagogy, because otherwise, you know, you don't know what's possible, and you don't really know what was there before you. And a lot of this project was digging into this rich history at SFAI and IAIA, which is the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe here, and seeing what, you know, what is the connection there, first of all, but, you know, just seeing this great amount of artists and talent that came from this New Mexican school over to the Bay Area, like Linda Loma Haftawa, and Kevin Redstar and a whole assortment of great artists in different disciplines too. Yeah, talking with Linda was, I interviewed her for this essay, and you know, she should be teaching a course at SFAI, you know. So there's so much possibility in the future, that I hope that this connection and just talking about what has happened back in the 60s and 70s, how that's influenced artists in the decades after. Thanks, Jeff. It's a privilege to even ask you any questions. But anyway, Jeff, looking at your entries for the exhibit, you know, I myself had a connection to Richard Berger when he was alive. I took a very brief course with him, but it was enough to just see how amazing an individual he was, and a privilege to work with him. And so you had picked a jacket of his as an object in the exhibit, and you included a quote. I wonder why you chose that quote, where it came from, and maybe if you could speak a little bit about how that quote maybe relates to the mission of SFAI, if you will, this identity of SFAI.
Thanks, Rye, for asking me about Richard Berger, because he was one of those fascinating people who treaded on this campus and taught in sculpture for, 30 some years. And that quote was indicative of a lot of things that Richard would write and say and teach. I'm sure you got that feeling in the time that you spent with him as a teacher, because he was really kind of brilliant, and his ideas about teaching art were pretty damn interesting too. And he thought of this place as a really special kind of place that was distinct from anywhere else. And he certainly brought that same aesthetic to his, his artwork, his sculpture, as well as his teaching, as well as that writing that's indicative in the Matrix entry. He would say at one point that, I remember him saying he would describe other art colleges where he had taught. And he said, someone asked him the distinction between those places and the Art Institute. And he said, well, those other places have classrooms and the Art Institute has studios. And there is this, and there's this fine line there that is really an indication of the way that he approached it. He approached teaching and his artwork with, making things. That piece of that vest that was the object that we used for one of the objects that we used of his motorcycle vest is classic because it's so much him. Truly, he was, as he was a big man. He was gruff. He was he rode Harley Davidsons, and he had this motorcycle vest. And yet at the same time, when you look at that vest that says, you know, Sculpture Art Institute, Frisco, you know, it's sewn on there and embroidered. And I think he was the one who sewed that on there. At least that's what I'm going to pitch and what I want to believe, because he had sewing machines down there in that sculpture area too. You know, he's certainly embraced all those different kinds of, you know, ways to make sculpture, and those, you know, very delicate, you know, elegant sculptures that he made. And he was just one of those interesting people of hundreds, thousands that have crossed through this place. I think of other faculty. I think some of those non-studio faculty, people like Dick Miller, who taught humanities in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, and who had been a Marine, I think, in Korea, and yet amazing and a complete pacifist. He ran for Congress on the Peace and Freedom Party out of Monterey at one point. And he taught a history class about the Civil War, and he brought in a Civil War musket into the classroom, or into the studio, and he shot the thing off to show the horrors of war. You know, made the, you know, this noise of the Civil War musket, you know, not something that you would do at any other college or university, but he wanted to impress upon these students how horrific an experience he had probably had as a Marine, and wanted to translate that into the next generation. Now, I think of students like, you know, Ed Hardy, who came here and was this printmaker who did etching, and wound up, you know, his final piece for graduation was something called Future Plans, and it shows him sitting on a stool without a shirt on, and he's all tattooed. And you know, at that time he had very few tattoos, but that was his future plans. He was going to abandon that idea of going to Yale for his fellowship that he'd been granted. Instead, he was going to start, you know, a tattoo shop in Vancouver. And then he revisits that piece later on, 30 years later, and he adds in all these books behind him, all these things that are part of his learning experience here, and how he was always well read, and how he truly was this, you know, Asian art historian, but all these books about art. And then he has himself sitting on 3 books, and they represent his teachers, Joan Brown, Gordon Cook, and his high school art teacher, you know, the people that really were influential to him. And that's kind of a quintessential student tribute to the faculty and the fellow travelers that were at the school at the time. One other piece that we put into one of the architecture sections was an image from an architecture magazine when the 1969 building was constructed. And it shows both buildings sort of smushed together there, looking from the north side. And you realize that there is this great sense of place here, and that you are in San Francisco. You are in this place on the edge of the continent. And it's a very special place, even on Russian Hill there. But at the same time, it's those people like Richard Berger or Hardy or Angela Davis who taught here, or those people like Mary O'Neill that Nina mentioned, as well as somebody who has this fascinating history and background that brought it here and then shared it with everybody else. I'm so impressed with all the collaborators and everybody who added to this project, including the designers for it as well. But you guys have peeled the onion back, and you have discovered so many new things that other people, or yourselves, I hope, will kind of launch into and do more research on, because it's really been terrific to learn so much about the place where I've been for a long time from all of your guys' entries into this. So thank you all for doing that.
Wow, that's awesome. Sherman has a really tough act to follow.
Yeah. Like, thanks for making me feel bad, Jeff.
Yeah, you do. Oh, so Sharon, it's like the guy that goes after Martin Luther King. He's like, well, Martin King said everything that I was going to say. So
I don't know if you guys know Peter Coyote.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
You know, Peter Coyote, he
Yeah,
does
yeah.
those narrations and that beautiful voice on like the Ken Burns films and things. And I was on a panel with him one time and I had to follow him after he was talking about the Diggers and the Black Panthers. I had to follow that guy.
Oh.
You know, all this content that everybody has put together really has been amazing. And I wanted to ask Sherwin about his entry for the Matrix 277 orbits show, which really does resonate with that sense of place that is here. And yeah, you know, I'm trying to figure out what it was, Sherwin, that intrigued you so much, and was there something initially that when you wandered into this place that captivated you so?
Thanks, Jeff. That's a great question. For me, it was the courtyard. Just walking into the courtyard and seeing the courtyard and the tower looming behind it. It's this sense of place. And I think as a student at SFAI, and as many past students can likely attest to testify to, is that there are certain areas of our Chestnut campus that have this, as you talk about, a locational resonance, you know, one that holds within it layers of years. There's this sort of like history that underlays and sometimes overlays the present moment. And so in thinking about this project, I wanted to emphasize this feeling of site and place in the three sort of locationally resonant and iconic areas of our campus for me personally, which, as I said, was the courtyard and the tower, and also the lecture hall. I think it was sitting down in the lecture hall for the first time was one of those times where I was like, I'm in a cohort, generational cohort of learners. And so, you know, through my entries, viewers kind of scroll through these different objects and photographs found by you, Jeff, and Becky in the archives. And it's my hope that viewers might feel this sort of gravity pull that our campus might have through all of its years, you know, all of its years of creativity and education and politics in institutionalism, activism, sociocultural, political activism, and sort of the multifaceted aspects of what I think of as just community and collaboration, which is, you know, as we were just talking about, it's a huge part of this project in particular, the Bamfa Matrix. And so important to this sort of resonance of place, you know, is storytelling, right? Like when we're talking about Becky's ghost stories, you know, and I would just like to end this part by just sharing one story with you now that I think is sort of a potent metaphor for SFAI and what it faces today. A close friend of mine and mentor, Mark D. Johnson, he told me a story once of a student-led quote unquote egg walk that took place outside the front doors of our Chestnut campus in the late 1980s, I believe. And it was student-led, it was student organized, and it was held to welcome the opening of the new graduate studio buildings at the bottom of the hill on Chestnut Street, where Chestnut meets Columbus, in what used to be the old Gap building, and I think it's now the Academy of the Art University building. So the students formed a line down the entire length of the Chestnut Street hill from the front doors of our campus down to this studio building, and at the top of the hill was a dozen eggs. And one by one, an egg was cracked into the hands of the first person in the line at the top, and it's passed hand by hand softly down to the last person at the bottom, with this objective of making it down to the bottom without the yolk breaking. And every time the yolk would break in someone's hands, a new egg would be cracked up top and passed down, hopefully without it breaking. 11 eggs went by, and finally, down to the very last egg of the dozen, it finally made its way down unbroken, down the hill to the last person at the doors of the new campus building. And I just wanted to tell that story as a way to talk about collaboration and community effort, group effort and community. And so let's not break the yoke.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
It was awesome.